Hey, what it do, guys? This X Factor 27 coming back to you guys again today. Today we're gonna be reacting to another video by Wrestle with Andy. It's about all-star tag teams. Some of the biggest wrestlers in wrestling history are gonna be on this list. So link would be for the original video would be down below. So you guys sit back and relax and watch this with me.
In pop culture, you'll see two powerhouses of their industries team up to create a supergroup of talent. Just look at Queen and David Bowie getting together for Under Pressure, or at the meeting of Al Pacino and Robert De Niro in Michael Mann's Heat. So it should come as no surprise that wrestling also has followed this blueprint from time to time, with two big stars coming together to combine their powers. But what are the best examples of all-star teams in wrestling history? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at right now, starting with maybe the most famous example, the
Man, I wasn't alive when the Mega Powers were formed, but Macho Man, ooh yeah, and Hulkamania coming at you, brother. I remember going back and watching them on WWE 24/7. If you guys don't know what that is, this was like when I was 10 years old and watching this whole thing play out and just seeing this past history happen and seeing how the Mega Powers formed. Macho Man, Randy Savage, being champion during that time, and then actually being friends with Hulk Hogan, them taking down the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, and the other dude, black dude, I forgot his name. And them just feuding and then them breaking apart pretty much because of Miss Elizabeth. Macho Man felt some kind of way, man. So you guys gonna learn a lot more about it.
Mega Powers. Yes, back in Golden Era WWF, at least during the early days of it, there were two big names who rose above all else, and that was Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage. Sure, the Hulkster was the clear number one, as he was on a different level to everyone else, but the sheer fact Savage was even able to get anywhere close to him was a testament to how great he was too.
Yep.
In fact, so good was the Macho Man, he managed to become a rare example of a babyface not named Hogan to hold the WWF title back then. And it was after he won this belt during a one-night tournament at WrestleMania 4 that the alliance between the Mega Powers was born. Yes, it all started when Hogan came out to celebrate with Savage following his big victory. And with the two now ruling the roost together, a friendship would soon blossom, as over the next year, following a handshake for the ages, they began teaming up on a regular basis to take on duos such as the Big Boss Man and Akeem and the Mega Bucks. Unfortunately, though, over time, the real-life rivalry between the two men started to bleed over onto the screen, as after coming to believe the Hulkster had lust in his eyes for Miss Elizabeth, Randy grew increasingly jealous of his partner, with this all bubbling up for months until it finally boiled over on the February 3rd, 1989 episode of the main event. What happened then? Well, after Hogan had abandoned his partner to help an injured Miss Elizabeth to the back, the champ approached him in the trainer's room following this and proceeded to attack him with his title. And so, like that then, the era of the Mega Powers came to an end, as at WrestleMania 5, a couple of months later, they'd square off one-on-one in what was probably the creative peak of the entire era. Of course,
Yeah. Their match and feud, them going against each other was very good, man. So you guys ever get a chance? I know we're in a new golden age with WWE, thanks to Triple H, of course, and other factors, of course, like that. But you guys go back and check it out, man. You can go look it up on Peacock, on YouTube, man. They got it all on here. So see a very good feud. I feel like that's one of the best feuds in wrestling history. I know it's a lot of feuds that happen, but it holds a special place in my heart because I remember that's one of the very first feuds I went back and watched myself. So yeah.
while the two would go their own separate ways after this, they would come back together again eventually over in WCW, both as babyfaces and heels. But that never really felt as exciting as it had back during the original Mega Powers run, if we're being honest. So we're not going to focus on it here. No, instead we're going to look at our next pair of subjects, two men who were on top of the world during the late 90s and whose stock only rose higher once they combined to form the Rock and Sock Connection.
I remember this. Rock and Sock was very interesting. Like two of the most random people that could form a tag team, Mankind, Mick Foley, and all his crazy personalities, and The Rock, one of the biggest people in wrestling movies and all. ego wasn't as big as it is now because as the final boss. But man, it was good, very interesting. Pair. It wasn't really supposed to work out, but it worked out. I feel like The Rock and Mankind really, I mean Mick Foley, real name, really helped elevate it to where it became one of the best tag teams.
That's right, if you were watching during the Attitude Era, then you'll no doubt remember this one, as it was the one which took both the Great One himself and Mankind and put them together in a Hall of Fame-worthy mashup. And the reason it was so great was because by all rights, it never should have worked. After all, in 1999, The Rock was the personification of cool, and Mick Foley, well, we all loved him, but he certainly wasn't on the level of cool as The Rock was. And when you consider the fact the pair had been such heated rivals prior to this, with their I Quit match at the 1999 Royal Rumble being a particularly noteworthy example of violence which probably went too far, there's even less reason to think they should have functioned as a unit. But it was that odd couple dynamic which worked so well for them in the end, because following Foley's attempts to get the People's Champion on his side when he needed a partner to take on The Undertaker and The Big Show on the August 30th episode of Raw that year, fans quickly fell in love with the whole pairing. So as the months went on, WWF ran with it and had the Rock and Sock connection keep going, with audiences tuning in every week to see Dwayne Johnson gradually fall in love with Mrs. Foley's baby boy too. Hell, at one point, they'd have one of the highest-rated segments in Raw history when on the September 27th, 1999 episode, Mankind put on a This Is Your Life segment for his partner. And it wasn't just their segments where the two found success either, as they'd also win in matches, enough to where they'd become 3-time tag team champions before all was said and done. Then, once their run was over, they'd go their separate ways for a while, only to reunite again at WrestleMania 20 when Foley once more needed a partner, this time to help him take down Evolution.
Yep.
After that, though, it really would be time on the Rock and Sock connection for good, but of course we would get a spiritual successor to their pairing eventually, one which occurred in the women's division as it happened. That's right, it's time to talk about the Boss and Hug connection.
Oh man, Sasha and Bayley. I love both of you women. I know Sasha's getting a lot of flack, her being Mercedes Moné now, being AEW, but she's still one of the best wrestlers in the world, man. So shout out to her. And Bayley is Bayley, Miss Oatmeal, I like to call her. One of the best wrestlers in the world right now as well, man. When they was in NXT, they put on some of the best matches of all time. I don't mean all time, but during the NXT and WWE era during that time, man. So these girls are really talented. And fun fact, I actually saw Bayley wrestle in person at a house show a couple of years ago, man. And she's amazing. Her heel run and oatmeal wise, you guys know what I mean by that. So I don't want you two to get me. So
Now, what happens when you take two of the best women's wrestlers in the world, two women who are legitimate best friends, and you put them in a team together? Well, you get the Boss and Hug connection, the union of Sasha Banks and Bayley. And this one is a particularly noteworthy super team, as it's so rare we get these kinds of things with the ladies. That said, if there was anyone who was going to do this in late 2010 and early 2020's WWE, then it was going to be the Boss and the Hugger, as they'd been so closely intertwined prior to this, what with their legendary pair of bouts happening at TakeOver Brooklyn and TakeOver Respect in 2015 and all. And obviously that rivalry would continue once the pair made their way up to the main roster soon thereafter. Eventually, however, they realized the best path towards success was to pool their resources and team up. And that's how the Boss and Hug connection was born. The only thing they needed at this point then was something new to fight over. So It's just as well their campaigning behind the scenes and good work on screen was able to convince WWE to revive an old idea from the past here, and that old idea was women's tag team titles. And so it was then that the inaugural holders were Sasha Banks and Bayley. Then there's their second run, which was arguably even better, where after the gold had started to dip in prestige a little, they did everything they could to bring them back to the top by holding them, along with the Raw and SmackDown women's titles, for much of 2020.
Yeah, they really carried during the pandemic era, man, for real. Them, Drew, Seth, all the guys, even when Roman came back. But these two were one of the very ones I remember, man, that I tuned into each Monday and Friday to see what shenanigans and trash talk they was gonna talk, man. I tell you, but they were some very good heels.
20, with this being the period that the Boss and Hug Connection were arguably the MVPs of the entire company. Really, it's just a shame this reign didn't come in front of fans, as it probably would have been a lot better remembered today if it had. We suppose the next question then is, will there ever be a third run from the duo? Well, not for a while at least, as Sasha is currently working for All Elite Wrestling under the name Mercedes Moné. And Mercedes isn't the only former WWE main eventer currently signed to AEW, as one half of our next two subjects is also there, meaning our chances of seeing Edge reunite with Randy Orton to reform Rated RKO aren't great right now. And that's a shame, because when they were together during late 2000s WWE, they were truly a great act. What made them so great? Well, for one, it was Edge and Randy Orton, two of the biggest stars of the Ruthless Aggression era and beyond, so how could it be anything less than excellent? Really, it didn't matter who they were put up against at this time. The Rated R Superstar and the Viper always seemed to have an answer, as using their combined slimy powers to create a heel supergroup for the ages, there was just no one who could match up to them. And that was why, after being the first duo to beat D-Generation X once they reformed in 2006, they went on to win the tag team titles from another duo we'll get to in a moment. Of course, it didn't end there, though, because now Rated RKO had to defend their belts, something they did against all comers, with their list of victims including the likes of the Hardy Boys, John Cena, and Batista. That said, their main rivals during this time continued to be Triple H and Shawn Michaels. And in the end, it was at least one half of DX who were able to end their reign when HBK teamed up with Big Match John to finally beat the heels on the February 8th, 2015 episode of Monday Night Raw. What happened after that? Well, now, with no more gold around their waists, dissension would start to sow itself between Edge and Randy Orton, dissension which eventually led to them going their separate ways and re-entering the singles division. Sure, they would occasionally reunite after that, but as far as Rated RKO being a full-time team, this was the end of the road. But it wouldn't be the only time Adam Copeland was part of a wrestling super team, as years prior over on SmackDown he'd been involved in one with a childhood hero of his. Who are we talking about here? Why, the pairing of Edge and Hulk Hogan, of course. Now, many fans might have forgotten this one even existed, as it...
Yeah, I had no idea about this one, guys. I really had 0% knowledge about this, so we both gonna learn something new today.
...was pretty short-lived, only lasting a few weeks, in fact. But during those few weeks, the duo was able to create something so special, it's still worth talking about today. But then, why wouldn't it be? Because what we were seeing here was Edge, someone who back in 2002 was still rising the ranks somewhat, getting a chance to team up with his childhood hero, the very man he'd cheered on from the crowd at WrestleMania 6.
Oh, that's so cool, man. I tell you, history it's just how the universe works, man. I tell you.
It all started when, in the midst of a feud with both Chris Jericho and Kurt Angle in the summer of that year, the Hulkster found himself in need of a partner, and this partner turned out to be none other than Edge, someone who was just returning from injury at that point. And almost immediately then, this proved to be a great decision on Hogan's part, as the Toronto native had a brilliant chemistry with him, with this chemistry being enough to help the American hero rid himself of his rivals once and for all soon thereafter. But that wouldn't be the end of their partnership. No, far from it, as after they'd fended off the challenge of Jericho and Angle, Edge and Hogan continued to work together, with them pretty quickly earning a shot at the WWE Tag Team Championships, then being held by Billy and Chuck. And wouldn't you know it, when the time for that match came on the July 4th episode of SmackDown, they'd actually win, making this the first and only time Terry Bollea would become Tag Team Champion in the WWE.
Oh, wow.
Sure, it would be a short run in the grand scheme of things, as only 19 days later they'd lose the belt to the Un-Americans, but that doesn't take away from the fact it was probably the highlight of Adam Copeland's entire career at this point, and that it was also a nice little additional to the trophy cabinet for his partner. And Hulk Hogan wouldn't be the only aging star who'd win Tag Team Gold during the Ruthless Aggression era either. No, there must have been something in the water then, because just 4 years later, the same thing happened with the supergroup pairing of Ric Flair and Rowdy Roddy.
I didn't know nothing about this one either. I didn't even know Roddy Piper won the championship in WWE. I mean, Tag Team Championship in WWE.
Piper, And as it happened, this was another case of one performer having a hero worship for the other, because despite being a legend himself and widely regarded as maybe the best to ever lace up a pair of boots, Ric Flair has always admitted to being a bit of a fanboy for the kayfabe Scotsman. So when he got a chance to team up with him in 2006 then, it must have felt like a dream come true, especially as they were getting a chance to go after the tag team titles. Why had they been paired up at all though? Well, this was the era of Cyber Sunday, an annual pay-per-view WWE held in which match gimmicks and participants would be voted on by fans ahead of time. And on that night, when the option of picking the Nature Boys partner against then tag champs the Spirit Squad was put up to an audience vote, they...
A fun fact, Dolph Ziggler was actually a part of the Spirit Squad, if you guys didn't know, before he became the Dolph Ziggler or Nick Mimic that we know and love today. He was actually part of the Spirit Squad.
choose none other than Hot Rod for the job. And so it was then that two of the greatest legends of the territory era proved they still had it when, after a bout which lasted just under 7 minutes, they beat Kenny and Mikey to win the gold. Sure, they might have been past their primes already by this point, but that clearly didn't mean they couldn't still get fans behind them enough to will them onwards to picking up the pinfall. Of course, given their advanced age though, the run which followed didn't last long. In fact, it would only be one day before Rated RKO beat them and took their titles away from them. And with that also came the end of this particularly short-lived wrestling super team then. That said, even if it was short-lived, it was certainly memorable and proved that age really is just a number when it comes to wrestling. Hell, age was never a problem for our next team either, because whether it be at the turn of the millennium or later into their careers during the 2010s, the Brothers of Destruction were always able to handle themselves.
Yeah, Kane and Taker, man. OGs, like I said in my last video. If you see these two coming after you and this your first match or first couple match in WWE, you get sent to the gulags or straight to the underworld, because you're not gonna make it against those guys.
In a fight. Yes, the union of kayfabe brothers The Undertaker and Kane have had quite a history over the years, and sure, while a lot of that history has seen them be at each other's throats, a significant portion has also been spent with them putting their differences aside and creating perhaps the most unstoppable unit in WWE history. The first time this happened was back in 1998, right after the end of their first program with one another, with their reasoning of joining forces then seemingly being that they each wanted to get the WWF title off of Steve Austin. Unfortunately though, while this did work, it would ultimately lead to them beefing and going their own separate ways again for a while. Not that it would be the end of their team forever though, as a couple of years later they'd reform once more, this time being so successful that they'd win the WWF Tag Team titles on 2 separate occasions and the WCW Tag Team titles once. Really, when people think of the Brothers of Destruction being awesome, this is generally the period they're remembering, as it's where they had the most success. But alas, all good things have to end eventually, and so, once the brand extension started in 2002, Kane and The Undertaker found themselves on separate brands, with them not coming together as a team again until 2006, after which they would periodically reunite whenever one brother needed a helping hand from the other. Hell, this continued all the way up to 2018 in fact, the year where they had their last match to date as the Brothers of Destruction at November 2nd's Crown Jewel, though the less said about that, the better. No, instead, let's just remember this supergroup for what it was when it was at its best, an absolute powerhouse, much in the same way that a team who once rivaled them was also a powerhouse of star attraction back in the early 2000s. Who are we talking about this time? Who else but the two-man Power Trip? Come on now.
I didn't know about this one either, guys. Triple H and Austin tag team. Oh, I bet that was a sight.
How could we do a video about the greatest supergroups in wrestling history and not include the one made up of the 2 biggest active stars in WWF post WrestleMania 17? Really, the only way this one could have possibly been bigger would have been if The Rock had stuck around and joined too. Basically, in the two-man Power Trip, you had the perfect combination of star power and in-ring talent, because back then there was simply no bigger figure in the industry than Stone Cold. And when it came to the game, well, this was pre-Quad Tear, so you could make a solid argument then that he was the best wrestler in the world. And this one was a massive success. Sure, it did come right at the time WWF was starting to fall in popularity, but that was less to do with the group itself and more to do with the fact that people didn't want to boo Steve Austin.
Yeah.
But boo him they eventually did, as both he and Paul Levesque spent the spring months absolutely dominating the main event scenes on both Raw and SmackDown, laying waste to opponents such as the Hardy Boys and the Brothers of Destruction, all while collecting all the gold, as at one point they held the WWF title, Intercontinental title, and Tag Team titles within their ranks. The only reason they didn't keep a stranglehold over things for longer, in fact, was because Triple H got injured. Yes, this was the famous match where, at the end of a 5-star classic pitting Austin and H against Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit, the game tore his quad muscle off the bone, and as a result would spend almost a year on the shelf while he recovered. Had things gone a little differently, then we might be talking about the two-man power trip as an even more successful pairing than we already do. Maybe the greatest of all time, in fact. But let's move away from WWE for a moment, as they weren't the only company who could produce a great super team back in the day. No, the same could be said of WCW too, as back during the mid-90s they created another pairing which also has a real claim to being the greatest of all time, none other than the Outsiders. Yes, while this pairing were both in mid-90s WWF, this friendship was largely a backstage thing, as the two were involved in the Clique alongside Triple H, Shawn Michaels, and Sean Waltman. And when it came to the on-screen product, they never really interacted in that way. In fact, the only time them being buddies was ever acknowledged in WWF was during the infamous curtain call at Madison Square Garden, right before they left to join WCW.
Yeah, and Vince McMahon was not happy about this at all, guys. He was really upset backstage, and it caused Triple H to lose a lot of matches as punishment.
And once they did leave then, everything changed, as soon thereafter, Scott Hall would show up on an episode of Nitro out of the blue and announce that he was waging war on the company, with this being the promo which started what would later become known as the NWO. It's true that there were 3 members of the NWO during its original incarnation, but Hulk Hogan always felt like his own separate island to Hall and Nash, someone who probably didn't hang around with them much outside of work. And that's exactly why the 2 former New Generation WWF stars would maintain their own separate team, which they could use whenever they wanted to enter the tag team division then, a team which was known as the Outsiders. Why the Outsiders? Well, when they first joined WCW, it was unclear what name the company wanted to refer to them as on screen, because they didn't have the rights to Razor Ramon and Diesel. In the end then, as the whole thing was being portrayed as a legitimate hostile invasion, the decision was eventually made not to refer to them by name at all, and instead just label them as a pair of outsiders. Not that this held them back though, because once the NWO was in full swing, the Outsiders found a great amount of success together, with them becoming WCW Tag Team Champions on a total of 5 occasions. Then, once World Championship Wrestling collapsed, they'd even return to WWE in 2002, now as a team once more, though this run would be a lot shorter-lived on account of Scott Hall's addiction issues. Just like with the Brothers of Destruction then, it's probably best to remember the Outsiders for what they did during their early days when they were fully changing the industry every time they appeared on TV. After all, there aren't many pairings who can say they did this, not even other members of the New World Order. That said, one member of the group would find a deeper degree of success in this area when he jumped ship to WWE and later formed a super group of his own with the certain Ayatollah of Rock and Rolla. Yes, our next
Jericho was very funny and a very good tag team, man. This when Jericho was so arrogant and snobbish, you just wanted to punch him in the face every time you saw him on screen with that little walk and everything, and couldn't get to him because you had Paul right here that would just knock you out and just slam you to hell. So, yeah.
Subjects are the supergroup of Jericho. Who were Jericho? Well, they were Chris Jericho and The Big Show, a pairing who might not seem like an obvious one on the face of things, but who ended up having a lot of chemistry together during the late 2000s. And if you need any evidence of how well they worked together, then you only have to look at the fact that at this point in time, they were able to become unified tag team champions. Sure, it wasn't this particular pairing which initially merged the titles. No, that was Edge and Y2J instead. But when the Rated R superstar went down to injury, Jericho decided he needed to find a replacement partner quickly, and in his haste to do so, it was Paul White he ultimately went to. So it's just as well they managed to continue on the winning ways of the previous team then by taking on all comers and defeating them in short order. Of course, like with all the other super teams we've looked at today, however, this one would come to its natural end eventually, with this end happening when Jericho dropped their unified tag gold to Triple H and Shawn Michaels at December 13, 2009's TLC Tables, Ladders, and Chairs. That said, they would have occasional reunions again in the future, such as the time they faced off against John Cena and Kane on the July 9th, 2012 episode of Raw, or the moment when they found themselves not only on the same side once more in a different company, but this time also with Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi by their side. So maybe the thing to be learned from this then is that once a supergroup is formed in wrestling, there's always the chance they'll get back together at some point, as wrestlers know having such partners by their side is the best way to success. But of course, that would be the case whenever we're talking about any all-star duo. After all, the only thing better than one legend is two.
All right, guys, but that's the end of the video. Shout out to Wrestling with Andy as always. It's just great to see all these pretty much all legendary Hall of Fame wrestlers teaming up for good and bad reasons to help people and cause chaos, man. So which one was you guys' favorite one? Like, comment, subscribe if you want to, and the link for the video will be down below if you guys want to check it out on your own. So y'all have a good day.